Marc served as Director of Legislative Affairs at the White House during Trump's first term. He joins me now from Washington, D.C. to try to make sense of what we are hearing and seeing and what this strategy is. And to note, you were also Chief of Staff for the Vice President, Mike Pence. So welcome to the program.
Thank you, Christian.
Can I just ask you, can you make head or tails strategically of actually what is coming from the White House? We've had all these sort of reasons and differing, morphing rationales for the war, and now escalation, de-escalation, very good talks. No, there aren't any talks. It's hard to understand.
Sure it is. And I do think that the president actually likes it that way. I think he likes to hold the cards in his hand, and he likes to have people guessing. I think the president has had an opportunity to transform the Middle East after 47 years of Iran being the greatest sponsor of terror to really change the situation there. I think there's been really successful military operations. But, Christian, I also think that the reality is that similar to Liberation Day roughly a year ago, I think there's also been concern in both the equity and the bond markets, and particularly when treasuries are spiking the way they were, early pre-market today. I think it's fair to say there's probably a correlation between those. And as you mentioned, even though energy prices are, down today with this announcement, I think most energy experts will tell you there's so much oil that is captured there in the Straits or is now offline in the Middle East that high energy prices are going to be an issue for quite some time. And so as here domestically, obviously affordability is being the number one issue as you head into the midterms. These are all escalating challenges for the administration and for Republicans. And so I do think the president is looking for somewhat of an ability to de-escalate now, but still leaving the option for additional military engagement 5 days from now.
Let me take a few of those issues. You talked about the bond markets and the soaring oil prices. As you know, the president's critics always are questioning him, including the credibility of the latest post about great talks and, et cetera. Here's Democratic Senator Chris Murphy. This isn't a message to Iran. It's a panicky message to the markets. No war escalation until markets close on Friday. Your response?
Look, I think that there is some reality that the president follows and tracks markets. And I think that, again, it's not just the energy prices, but it was also the bond markets. I do think that, one other point I'd make to you, Christian, is I probably don't agree with much of the Democrat criticism about the president's ability to engage here without congressional approval. I think the Constitution gives the executive branch wide latitude on foreign policy. But I think one thing of concern is when you talk about, reports of Israel confirming that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are the ones having conversations with Iranian parliament. For two real estate developers to be in charge of foreign policy with Ukraine and Gaza, and now in theory with resolution in Iran, I think there's a reason that you want people to be Senate confirmed, because they can be brought to Congress to be questioned about any deals that they're making. And I think having two real estate developers who are not part of that confirmation process is somewhat, I think, certainly concerning.
That is about as diplomatic an analysis of that as I've heard from somebody on your side. There has been a lot of issues raised, and I'm not doing this as a gotcha. These are two incredibly important global issues. The threat to Europe and Ukraine from Russia, and the threat to the whole Middle East from Iran and all these wars, Israel everywhere. So I do think you're absolutely right to talk about who should be best positioned to actually have these negotiations. And I would just ask you, if you were the Iranian regime and you were being asked to negotiate again with these same people, when both times previously that you did it, the very next day, while you thought negotiations were still on, wars started against you. In June, the 12-day war, and now this one. If you just look at the other side for a minute, put yourself in their shoes, what do you think they're going to ask for? I mean, talk about transactional. They're going to ask for a lot more.
Well, Christian, look, I don't think that, I think the reality is that in past negotiations, there's plenty of evidence that Iran has broken those deals behind the scenes as well. And so I think probably they're looking for who's going to give me the quickest and easiest deal out of this military barrage at this moment. And I don't know if that's necessarily in the best interest of America either. But if I'm in their shoes, you're asking that question, I don't think they've actually been the most honest and faithful negotiators across the pond there. So I would imagine that they'd be looking to say, who's going to give me the best deal to end this quickly, and then we can continue going about our business, particularly if there's not regime change that's requested.
Yeah, well, see, that's my point. I wasn't talking about honesty and good faith and all the rest of it. I'm just saying the facts. And, there are plenty of analysts who say that they actually, well, you tell me what you think. The president and Israel laid out some rationales. So there was the nuclear issue, the ballistic missile issue, and also the treatment of the Iranian people. You can very credibly claim that the nuclear and ballistic missile issue has been severely degraded. Nuclear probably even more than missiles. As you can see, they're using a lot of missiles to retaliate right now. But they've moved away from talking about regime change, from talking about the Iranian people. What do you make of that? Because there was a promise to the Iranian people that they would be liberated. There was a promise.
Kashana, I think that the reality is that previous administrations, I think, failed when there was a green revolution in 2009 to actually support the Iranian people. The Iranian people, I think, have been terrorized for 47 years, and I think America should stand with them. But I think you're exactly right. Initially, there may have been some notion of that, but there's been a significant backing away. And I think that the president, to be fair to him, when he campaigned in 2024, promised no foreign wars, but also no efforts for regime change. And as you've seen in Venezuela, even though Maduro was replaced, the administration chose to leave in place the same leadership that had been, I think, brutalizing the people in Venezuela as well. So it doesn't appear that that has been as much of a priority for this administration. I think it begs the question, if there's not regime change, will you just simply allow the current leadership in Iran to, as you say, rebuild, and particularly if they continue to get resources and support from China and Russia in the years ahead?
Can I ask you, because, politically in the United States, how do you view, because there are plenty of polls and there's fracture really in terms of Republicans, obviously the whole country, the majority is against the war, some 60% or so. But we also hear that major MAGA leaders and influencers, former congresspeople, etc., are very much against this, very much believe that the U.S., Donald Trump, has been dragged into this by Israel. You saw Joe Kent, who was the chief anti-terrorism, official, resign, saying the very same thing. And actually, I had the former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, this past week telling me there was no imminent threat. It was just we had to get to them before there was an imminent threat. So my question to you is, where is his base on this? And is it politically compromising or not?
I think that the president's base is with him. I think the reality is a lot of influencers have proven they actually don't have that much influence. I think the reality is that most of MAGA is really supportive of Trump personally, more so than a set of issues. And so that's why it enables him to recalibrate or change his position so quickly. And I think that he's continued to have significant support behind him, even inside the Republican Party, who had expressed resistance to foreign wars, are very supportive of this. Again, I'm also very supportive of this military engagement. I think the president's done the right thing. I do think that they could have explained to the American people the American interest on the front end of this far more clearly, because, again, the number one issue domestically remains affordability. And I think that the Republicans have significant challenges heading into midterms when I think this current trade agenda has continued to elevate prices for Americans. Now energy prices are significantly elevated. Many are forecasting they're going to remain elevated through the summer, regardless if this wraps up in the next 5 days. And so as you head into the fall, I think there's going to be significant political pressure on Republicans. I think is a different issue than whether you support this war. It's a question of, well, what about my pocketbook? And I think that's where there's significant vulnerability for Republicans.
And in the immortal words of actually a Democrat, it's always the economy, stupid, right? So, I mean, here we are again. And when, Trump cabinet secretaries like the Energy Secretary Chris White says, and actually the President, Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, etc., Americans need to suffer short-term pain for long-term gain. They've actually stopped saying that, I might add, as the short-term pain is massively painful. How does that go over with voters, do you think?
Well, Again, I think that I think voters can tolerate that on the front end if it's explained to them. But if it's not on the front end, and then it's basically anticipated or expected that they're supposed to just swallow that cost, I think that there's a political ramification for that. And Christian, I think one thing that we talk about the energy prices, but really is not getting a significant amount of coverage in America, is truly the cost of fertilizer that is, been basically risen 40 to 50% and probably still going higher because its base components in many cases come from natural gas. And as you know, the UAE was one of the largest exporters of fertilizer to the United States. And the trade agenda, if anyone's been harmed the most, it's been the farmers of America. And so the heartland of America is the one that's getting hit, not just with energy prices and trade agenda, but also fertilizer costs. And I think that's a political weapon as well coming into this fall.
Indeed. And of course, just so people understand, the fertilizers mean crops, which means the price of food and everything at the grocery store. And the way you, again, delicately put the trade agenda, these are the massive tariffs you talked about Liberation Day, which also apparently you're now confirming did hit Americans in the pocket and also American farmers. What do you think, though, now, given all of this extra layers of pain and economic pain that's gone on, do you think President Trump will abide by what the Supreme Court said, which these are not constitutional, they should be Congress's prerogative, but he wants to do again by, I think, executive order or whatever? What do you think he will do?
I think the president will continue to use a lot of different levers that he has on the trade agenda to continue to push a very protectionist worldview that he has. And so he'll use 232 and 301, which allow investigations to then assert unfair trade practices. He's also going to use a Section 122, which, Christian, honestly, I think he'll lose that legally too. But I think the president's posture is, so what? I'll have the opportunity. It's going to take them many months to form a case, to have it work its way up to the courts, to be heard at the Supreme Court. And by then, we're another year and a half down the road of me enforcing a trade agenda on the American people. And so some of it, I think, has been established under previous presidents as well. Some of it, he's going to push an envelope and allow the courts to play out. In the meantime, take advantage of it because he'll feel like, again, I have the levers that I want to basically put the power in my hands to negotiate with foreign countries.
That's another good question, or a good segue to foreign countries. The president needs help. He's actually called now for help from NATO, from Europe, from Asian allies and all the rest of it, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz. And they are not rushing to help, not because, but because their interests are being harmed by this war and because they don't want to get dragged into a war that could see them being attacked, as collateral damage. Do you think it's been positive for the United States or negative for the president to have spent the entire year really dumping on allies every time he possibly can, calling them names in public like cowards or this or that, when really the strength of America, overseas anyway, has been the strength of its alliances?
Well, Christian, I think America needs to lead the free world, and if we're not, then I fear that that the free world is not being led. And I think that there's a couple different parts of that question. I think in Asia, you're right. In many cases, they import most of their energy from this part of the world, and so they have a self-interest in not getting engaged. But at the same time, the president has assessed enormous tariffs on South Korea and Japan, who in the first Trump administration, we wanted to partner with to isolate China, viewing China as our number one adversary. And now it's more this unilateral approach to people who have been our best allies. And I think in Europe, it's a different equation where I think the president, looks for NATO to come to his side in this battle. And I think that they should, but at the same time, obviously, the president has been very critical of NATO and has not been willing to take the same stance that NATO has when Russia's attacking, Eastern Europe. And so I think that it's kind of two different equations here. But you're right that it's not has been the most diplomatic approach to how can we be partnering together to isolate who are our true enemies, in my mind, China and Russia.
Yeah, and many people are saying that both of them, and most particularly China, are making out like bandits from this current situation. Yeah. But can I ask you, because you say it very diplomatically, but it's clear you have your own set of ideas of how to conduct diplomacy and other such things. So if you were still in the White House, how would you advise the president right now to get out of this bind? If maybe you don't think it's a bind, but a lot of other people do.
Well, again, I think that Iran has posed an enormous challenge. I think they have been the largest sponsor of terror. They have murdered many Westerners, many Americans, many innocent Americans. And so I think that this has been overdue for America to take this action against Iran. And so I applaud them for that. I just think on the front end, there could have been a better case made to the American people to explain it. Now that we're here and where we are, I think that, what I worry about is having gone this far and then pulling back because, as I said at the beginning of your show, if you basically leave the current Ayatollah in charge, then the likelihood is that they're going to get refunded by China and by Russia and can be basically an even greater nemesis because they'll look to get retribution for this latest round of attack.
Yeah. Can I just end with something that shocked many, many people, and that was President Trump's very unchristian reaction to the death of Robert Mueller. He died of complications of Parkinson, we understand. Of course, Robert Mueller, previous head of the FBI, was tasked with investigating Russian interference in the elections, in 2016 elections. And Trump says, good, I'm glad he's dead. He can no longer hurt innocent people. When a president says something like that, I mean, what do you think?
Christiane, I served in the first administration. I believe that in many cases the Russia investigation was a hoax. I think it was harmful to American democracy. Having said that, that sort of response is totally inappropriate. Robert Mueller, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, not just was head of FBI, he was a Marine who served America in battle, was honored for his valor, received the Bronze Star, and was married for 60 years. The man was an honorable man who should be given the respect that he deserved for his service to our country.
Well, I'm very glad to hear you say that. Thank you. I'm glad I asked you. Thanks for your perspective on all of these important issues. Marc Short. Thank you.